I've met the person I want to spend the rest of my life with.
The contestants of Love is Blind were tasked with finding love fast, but that wasn't all they had to worry about.
I've never seen her before.
There were some super strict rules they were forced to follow that may have made it more difficult to find the one.
I've wanted a best friend for a while now.
Making the cut. According to creator and executive producer Chris Coelen, the secret to making Love is Blind a success was choosing the right cast members. But getting picked wasn't easy, especially since Chris admitted potential contestants had no idea what to expect when they showed up to the audition. He believed the show's success would depend on selecting people who were truly looking for love and not just hoping for 5 minutes of fame. The number one criteria contestants had to meet was to be genuine about who they are and what they were looking for in a relationship. According to Mark Cuevas, he was scouted via his Instagram account, and producers were upfront that this was a chance to see if he could find love sight unseen.
I came into this being open-minded to the idea that I could possibly find love.
Lack of contact. The premise of the show is that couples have to commit without having the opportunity to see or touch each other first. Yet Jessica Batten claims there was one more big obstacle contestants faced when choosing a match. Because of the time crunch, everyone had to be on during their interactions in the pod. This made for entertaining television, but when she landed in Mexico, she realized that casual conversations with Mark were totally different than she had expected. According to Jessica, she didn't realize that the gaps in their ages and life experiences would have such an impact on their chemistry when they came face to face. Engagement comes first. This format was definitely challenging for the contestants, but Chris Coelen was stressed out too. Going into the show, one of his biggest fears was that nobody would get engaged. To keep seeing their partners, they had to get engaged, but proposing and saying yes were optional. Chris said nobody was forced to get engaged or married, but if everyone had chosen to walk away, this season would have been a lot shorter. Cameron and Lauren were the first couple to say I love you.
Cameron,
Yes.
I think I love you.
But Lauren was definitely overwhelmed by the prospect of spending forever with someone she had just met.
Did we just say that?
Yeah.
Producers set up pod dates. Contestants can choose whether to say I do or I don't, but they weren't allowed to choose their initial pod dates. This is one time when producers have to step in and pair people up. Chris claims this was the most practical way to starting things off, and each contestant has to obey time limits, so they have an opportunity to talk to everyone. Finding time to fall in love was surprisingly difficult for many contestants. Separate lives. One big challenge was the fact that male and female cast members had to live separately during the show. Not only that, but they had entirely different teams of producers to assist the men and women. Lauren Speed compared the experience to living in a sorority house. Rather than feeling competitive with one another, Lauren said the women bonded quickly and formed a kind of sisterhood. Meanwhile, Kenny Barnes claimed the guys were all about keeping busy. They'd have plank competitions, cook together, and go for runs. There were connections being made in the pods, but contestants were definitely bonding behind the scenes too. Sleeping arrangements. There was a lot of fun going on outside of the pods, but not so much when it came to sleeping. Kenny said that the cast was forced to sleep in trailers and tried to get cozy on the kind of beds common in correctional facilities. He believed the producers were trying to make everyone feel as though they were roughing it, and it definitely worked. Sleep was hard to come by, and Kenny said he was only averaging about 4 hours per night. Visiting sessions. Contestants might not have had control over their sleeping arrangements, but they did get to choose how much time they spent in the pods. The more often they spent there, the more in-depth conversations they could have with one another. Chris claims the longest pod session lasted a whopping 5 hours and only ended because someone had to use the restroom. Even though the producers encouraged them to take breaks and eat, many contestants were set on spending as much time talking as possible. Can you really blame them for trying to make every moment count before they had to walk down the aisle? Cutting off contact. It's no wonder contestants were so eager to bond with one another considering they were cut off from the outside world. Like many other reality shows, including The Bachelor, the cast members weren't allowed to use their cell phones for most of the show. Not only that, but they had zero access to the internet and couldn't even watch television or binge on their favorite Netflix shows. This could get stressful at times, but Jessica found solace in keeping a journal. She said it also helped her keep track of her days since time seemed to move so slowly on set. In fact, books were one of the only forms of entertainment these contestants were allowed access to. Get vulnerable. In the real world, people often get to know each other slowly over time, but on Love is Blind, getting down and vulnerable right away is an absolute must. Falling in love can be scary, especially when the cameras are rolling, but contestants had to get over it quickly, according to Mark Cuevas. He called the experience the Vulnerability Express and said the other male contestants were supportive of each other during this tumultuous time. Rory Newbrough seemed to spend more time counseling his fellow contestants than he did chatting with Danielle Droulin.
When you're in love, it's scary, right? It's something that's powerful.
But good advice was often surprisingly hard to come by during filming. No advice. One frequent critique of reality TV is that hosts and producers overstep boundaries in order to stir up conflict between contestants. But on Love is Blind, cast members weren't allowed to seek advice from anyone but each other. Nick and Vanessa Lachey definitely had their own opinions, but they couldn't discuss them with the contestants or offer them any guidance. Chris claimed that he wanted to make sure there was as little outside interference as possible, so the producers weren't allowed to dish out advice, no matter how badly they may have wanted to prevent awkward moments, like when Carlton leaned in to kiss Diamond a little too soon. Special requests. Producers were forbidden from coaching the cast, but they found other ways to be helpful. If contestants wanted something specific like a book or a certain snack, they had to make a request to the producers. And yes, that includes alcohol. Surprisingly, there were no restrictions on what they were allowed to eat or drink, and Kenny admitted that Bailey's and coffee was his drink of choice on the show. Well, we should say there were no restrictions for humans. Jessica did get called out for giving her dog a sip of wine on the show. Make a connection. Everyone on Love is Blind was hoping to find the one, and failing to make a connection was not an option, at least not if they wanted to remain on the show. The original cast was much bigger than most people realize, and there were about 40 to 50 romantic hopefuls. But as time went on, lots of them just didn't make a connection with anyone and were kicked off the show. Even some of the contestants who did stick around didn't get as much screen time because their conversations just weren't compelling. We didn't even know Kelly Chase and Kenny Barnes existed until right before they got engaged. Keeping secrets. While contestants were encouraged to open up to each other, they were forbidden from filling their friends and families in on what was happening. Getting engaged is supposed to be an exciting moment, but cast members had to wait to share their joy until after they returned from Mexico. But since cell phones weren't allowed on the set, that made it easier for contestants to resist updating their relationship statuses online. Same location. Needless to say, Love is Blind didn't exactly make it easy to fall in love. Couples couldn't see each other, and when they did, they had to deal with getting engaged and married quickly. So to make things at least a little bit easier, Chris decided to cast only contestants who lived in Atlanta, Georgia. That way, distance would pretty much be the one obstacle these contestants didn't have to deal with. But why Atlanta specifically? According to Chris, it was a purely practical decision. From a production standpoint, the massive size of Pinewood Stage made it the perfect place to pull all of those giant pods. Keeping it quiet. Contestants weren't able to reach out to their friends and family for most of the filming process.
I don't have my phone, so no one knows where I am. No one knows I'm in Mexico.
But they were still forced to keep their relationship, or lack thereof, on the down low even after the show concluded. Since Love is Blind was filmed in advance, couples couldn't go public with their relationship without spoiling the ending for fans. Whether couples broke up or stuck together, they still had to keep it quiet. Getting on air. Producers were initially worried about not having enough content, but they actually ended up with too much. Contestants needed to agree to have their stories featured on the show, of course, but they also had to accept that their footage might not be used. According to Rory, producers weren't prepared for how successful their experiment would really be. While he couldn't experience love at first sight with Danielle Droulin, he fell for her the moment they started talking. Producers were expecting 1 or 2 engagements and were prepared for up to 5, but they ended up with 8. Rory and Danielle's story didn't make the cut, and sadly, Danielle didn't feel the love after the camera stopped rolling. Budgeting. People didn't sign up for Love is Blind to make money. They were hoping to find love, and those who made it through to the end had to open up their wallets at some point. While the show paid for wedding basics, it didn't cover the entire cost. Each couple that made it to the altar was expected to fund their own nuptials. This caused some friction between Amber Pike and Matt Barnett when they couldn't agree on how much was too much to spend on a wedding dress.
Which puts me at least like $400 over budget.
But since financial issues can be a strain on marriage, it's better they figured this out sooner rather than later. The real deal. One big question we all had while watching the show was, is this for real? Not only did we want to know if contestants were truly falling in love, but are those wedding ceremonies legally binding? The answer to that is a resounding yes. Couples who chose to get married on the show had to agree to legally bind themselves together. This put all the more pressure on contestants to be sure when they said I do. Soundproof. Getting into a completely soundproof pod sounds like a horror movie scenario, but contestants had to agree to do so in order to appear on the show. The people inside the pods could speak to each other using microphones and speakers, but the pods themselves were completely soundproof. Chris believes this helped contestants concentrate on their dates without getting distracted. Creative editing. Even though producers wanted to create an authentic experience, contestants had to cope with the fact that the truth may appear different through the lens of a camera. The show really hyped up the fact that Jessica was interested in Barnett and made it seem as though that was the reason things didn't work out between her and Mark. But both Mark and Jessica deny that's what really happened and believe in the end they just weren't compatible. What do you think about the rules these contestants were forced to follow on Love is Blind? Do you think it's possible to find love under these circumstances? Let us know what you think in the comment section below, and then click subscribe for more new videos from the Taco. Bye for now.